Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to review my preliminary defense presentation. My name is Corrinne Williams, and my dissertation title is The Experiences of Black Women Leading in Precarious or Crisis Oriented Leadership Roles. This study examines the lived experiences of Black women who are appointed to high risk leadership roles and explores how emotional intelligence influences their leadership, decision making, and resilience. This presentation provides an overview of my dissertation proposal, focusing on the first three chapters. I will begin with chapter one, highlighting the problem, purpose, and research questions. I will then summarize the key elements of the literature review and theoretical frameworks in chapter two. And the rest of the time will be spent in chapter three, where I will walk through research design and methods as outlined in my proposal. Chapter one opens up by outlining the broad issues that frame this study, which are Black women remain significantly underrepresented in leadership roles across sectors. When they are not promoted, they are disproportionately placed into high risk or crisis driven leadership roles. These types of appointments are widely known as glass cliff roles. For Black women, these risks are compounded by the intersection of race, gender, and heightened emotional labor expectations. They often face intensified scrutiny, smaller performance latitude, and competing identity based pressures that shape how their leadership is perceived and evaluated. Additionally, these challenges occur within organizations that frequently lack the structural support necessary to sustain their success long term. This combination of underrepresentation, crisis driven placement, and intersectional demands establishes a critical problem that this study aims to address. Statement of the problem. Despite decades of diversity efforts, Black women remain severely underrepresented in leadership across sectors. Research shows that they are disproportionately appointed to roles during times of crisis, instability, or heightened public scrutiny, known as glass cliff positions. These high risk appointments come with intensified expectations, such as Black women are often assumed to possess emotional resilience, relational competence, and crisis management capabilities, yet they are seldom provided with the structural support necessary to succeed. Compounding this, intersectional biases mean that Black women face both racialized and gendered scrutiny, narrow margins for error, and elevated emotional demands. Although Glasscliff phenomenon is well documented in general, we know far less about how Black women uniquely experience, interpret, and navigate these roles. Their stories remain largely absent from empirical literature. This gap is what grounds the need for this present study. The purpose of the studies. This phenomenological research seeks to understand how Black women leaders experience and navigate glass cliff leadership roles, positions where they are appointed during organizational crises, instability, or intense public scrutiny. The study also examines how emotional intelligence influences their leadership behaviors, including how they respond to heightened expectations, navigate racialized and gendered scrutiny, and maintain resilience under pressure. In addition, the study explores the emotional, psychological, and career impacts of these assignments, helping us to understand how these high risk appointments affect leadership trajectories over time. Finally, the purpose extends to generating insights that can guide more equitable leadership development practices, organizational supports, and systemic reforms that better sustain Black women leaders in moments of crisis. The research questions. So these are the four research questions reflected below on the slide deck that will be guiding this study. So looking at research question number one, it examines the types of challenges Black women face when they are appointed to leadership roles during times of crises or instability. This includes structural, interpersonal, organizational, and emotional challenges. Looking at research question number two, It explores the strategies and resources they draw on, with particular attention to emotional intelligence, such as emotional regulation, empathy, and self awareness, as well as the external support systems, such as mentorship and or networking opportunities. Research question number three, it focuses on how Black women leaders define their own successes and the practices they use to sustain effectiveness under high pressure conditions. And finally, looking at research question number four, ask what insights and recommendations they have for organizations and for future Black women leaders, which supports the practical contribution of the study. Together, these questions frame the phenomenological exploration of lived experience, meaning making, and leadership processes in crisis driven contexts. Next, we will discuss the definitions of the key terms. So, these core terms that you see reflected on the slide deck here, they really anchor the foundation of my study and help to frame the experiences examined in this dissertation. So, first, starting out with the glass cliff. The glass cliff refers to the high risk leadership roles assigned during times of crisis, which disproportionately impact women and women of color. Looking at emotional intelligence, now this is central to how leaders navigate emotionally demanding contexts. And next up, we have intersectionality. It highlights how race and gender combine to shape the experiences of Black women leaders. I also include emotional labor here, which is a major component of how Black women are expected to perform in leadership roles. And I have signaling theory, which explains why organizations may elevate Black women during periods of crisis, often to project diversity or stability, even when meaningful structural support is absent. The introduction to the literature review. So this slide introduces the literature review. In chapter 2, I synthesized research across three major bodies of scholarship that directly inform my study. The first being the glass cliff phenomena, followed by emotional intelligence, and then third, the intersectionality in leadership. Each of these areas help to connect to one or more of my research questions, and it lays a foundation for really understanding why Black women's crisis driven leadership appointments warrant deeper qualitative study. And I will briefly summarize these major themes before transitioning into my theoretical frameworks. So, glass cliff literature. Research on the glass cliff consistently shows that women are disproportionately appointed to leadership roles when organizations are already facing instability, crisis, or reputational risks. These positions are set under precarious conditions, such as declining performance, public scrutiny, or internal conflict, which limits the likelihood of long term successes. Studies also show that leaders in Glasscliff roles face smaller evaluation latitude and heightened scrutiny, meaning their performance is judged more harshly and they are held to stricter standards more so than their male counterparts. For Black women, these risks are amplified. And intersectional bias places them at the convergence of racialized and gendered expectations, making them more likely to be appointed during high risk situations while still receiving limited structural support. This connects directly to research question number 1, which asks how Black women describe their experiences, as well as research question number 4, which examines how organizational conditions either support or undermine their success. Looking at emotional intelligence. So, with emotional intelligence, it is widely recognized in the leadership literature as a predictor of effectiveness, particularly during times of crisis or organizational instability. Research also shows that leaders with higher emotional intelligence tend to navigate conflict more effectively. They can maintain team cohesion and manage stress with greater resilience. For Black women, emotional intelligence carries a dual function, On one hand, it is a genuine leadership resource that helps them navigate crisis driven roles, build trust, and stabilize teams. And on the other hand, emotional intelligence is often assumed of Black women due to racialized and gendered stereotypes framing them as emotionally strong, nurturing, or exceptionally resilient. This leads to disproportionate emotional labor, heightened expectations, and, in many cases, exhaustion or burnout. This literature directly supports my second research question, which explores how emotional intelligence informs the way Black women navigate glass cliff conditions, and it also links to emotional and psychological consequences that are explored in research question number 3. Intersectionality and leadership. So, intersectionality provides a critical analytic lens for understanding why Black women experience glass cliff leadership roles differently than other groups. Because race and gender operate simultaneously, Black women encounter compounded stereotypes such as assumptions of exceptional resilience, emotional strength, or natural suitability for crisis management. These intersecting biases heighten scrutiny, emotional labor demands, and expectations of performance under pressure. In crisis contexts, these structural inequities are magnified, resulting in smaller margins for error and reduced institutional protection. This literature directly informs my research questions about lived experiences, relating it back to research question number 1, emotional and psychological impact, which is rooted in research question number 3, and organizational structures that support or undermine Black women's success, research question number 4. Theoretical frameworks. So, my study is guided by two complementary frameworks, one being critical constructivism and the other emotional intelligence. First, starting out with looking at critical constructivism, based on Kincheloh's work, which argues that knowledge, leadership, and organizational realities are socially constructed and shaped by political, cultural, and structural power dynamics. This framework really pushes us to ask who is recognized as a legitimate leader, whose experiences are valued or devalued, and how institutional discourses such as diversity or inclusion efforts may create symbolic rather than substantive change. In the context of the study, critical constructivism, it helps to uncover how Black women's leadership experiences are shaped by intersecting systems of race, gender, and hierarchy, especially when they are appointed to crisis driven glass cliff roles. Next up, looking at emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is grounded in Goldman's model, which provides the interpersonal lens. So it focuses on the capacities such as self awareness, self regulation, empathy, motivation, and social skills, all of which play a critical role in navigating organizational crises. Research shows that Black women are often expected to demonstrate heightened emotional intelligence in order to stabilize teams, resolve conflicts, and maintain culture, even when institutional support is limited or racialized and gender scrutiny is high. Together, these frameworks create an integrated understanding of the phenomenon. With critical constructivism, it helps to explain the structural creation of the glass cliff conditions, while emotional intelligence will work at help explaining how Black women interpret, navigate, and lead within them. This dual framework guides both my research design and the analysis of the participants' lived experiences. Now we're looking at methods. So this chapter 3, it outlines the research design and the methodological choices guiding this study. Given that my research aims to understand how Black women experience and make meaning of their appointments to crisis-oriented leadership roles, a qualitative phenomenological approach is the most appropriate. Phenomenology allows me to explore the essence of their lived experiences, aligned directly with all four of my research questions. So, the methods used, including purposive sampling, semi structured interviews, bracketing, and thematic analysis, are intentionally selected to capture emotional, psychological, and structural dimensions of Glasscliff leadership. This chapter centers the voices of Black women leaders and prioritizes depth, nuance, and contextual interpretation. The methodological approach. So, chapter three begins with the methodological foundation for this study. I'm using a qualitative phenomenological approach guided by Mustakas to explore how Black women leaders experience and interpret their appointments to crisis driven or precarious leadership roles. Phenomenology is the most appropriate methodology for this study because my primary focus is on understanding how participants make meaning of Glasscliff assignments, how they emotionally navigate these roles, and how emotional intelligence shapes their leadership processes in high stakes contexts. The strengths of phenomenology include the depth and richness of the data, the capacity to explore and capture complexity, and its alignment with identity based and underexplored leadership phenomena. Limitations include small sample sizes, the need for rigorous bracketing to minimize researcher bias, and the subjective nature of interpretation, all of which I address through structured validation procedures and inter-rater reliability checks described later on in the presentation. The unit of analysis and population. For this study, the unit of analysis is the individual lived experience of one Black woman leader who have led in precarious or crisis oriented leadership roles. The focus is not on organizations or outcomes, but on how the woman's own meaning making, emotions, interpretations, and leadership navigation within Glasscliff conditions. Looking at the population from which participants will be drawn is Black women leaders in the United States who currently hold or have previously held mid level or higher level leadership roles, such as senior manager, director, vice president, or C suite positions, with a minimum of 3 years of leadership experience. This ensures participants have the depth of exposure necessary to speak meaningfully about high stakes leadership, elevated visibility, and emotionally demanding contexts. These criteria directly align with the phenomenon under investigation and the purpose of the phenomenological inquiry. The sample size. In the phenomenological research, the goal is to achieve depth, richness, and saturation of the lived experience, not large numbers. For this study, I am targeting 20 to 25 participants, which allows for both diversity of experience and the phenomenological depth. The minimum number of completed interviews is 15, which is consistent with qualitative saturation benchmarks in phenomenology and allows for strong thematic development. The sample size is intentionally designed to ensure variation across sectors such as corporate, nonprofit, government, and higher education. This strengthens the study by capturing the different organizational contexts in which Glasscliff dynamics manifest while still keeping the sample manageable for deep interpretive analysis. Participant selection. So, the phenomenological studies require intentional and information rich sampling. Therefore, I use purposive sampling, which is the most appropriate strategy for selecting participants who have directly experienced the phenomenon being studied. A master list of potential participants will be developed from LinkedIn using filters such as job title, leadership level, industry, and years of experience. The inclusion criteria require that participants self identify as Black women residing in the United States of America, currently holding or have held or previously have held at least a mid-level management role, um, senior manager, director, VP, or C-suite, and have a minimum of 3 years of leadership experience. Have experienced a crisis-driven or high-stakes leadership context that reflects a glass cliff situation, and are willing to participate in a 60-minute semi-structured interview. And the exclusion criteria, it will remove individuals without leadership tenure, those with fewer than 3 years of leadership experience, and those working outside of the United States, or individuals unable to provide reflective accounts of crisis based leadership. And if more women volunteer than needed, I will use maximum variation sampling to ensure representation across sectors and organizational types. This will help to strengthen the richness and transferability of the findings. Interview protocol. So, for this study, I will conduct semi structured interviews, which allow for both consistency across participants and flexibility for participants to elaborate in meaningful ways. Each interview will last approximately 1 hour and we will be conducted via Zoom. The interview protocol will begin with an icebreaker question asking participants to share their understanding of awareness of the glass cliff. This will serve as a rapport building step and sets a reflective tone. The protocol will then move into 11 open ended questions, each directly aligned to my research questions. Probing questions will be used when needed to clarify responses or deepen the participant's narrative while ensuring that the participant, not the researcher, guides the meaning making process. With participants' consent, all interviews will be audio recorded, and I will keep brief observational notes regarding tone, pauses, or contextual cues that enrich the interpretation of the data. This protocol supports consistency, depth, and alignment with the phenomenological inquiry. So, the interview protocol validity. To ensure validity of the interview protocol, I used multiple layers of review. First, two doctoral level peers with experience in qualitative research have reviewed the full set of interview questions. They examined whether each question aligned with the research questions, whether the language was clear, and whether probing opportunities were sufficient. Their feedback helped to inform refinements to several items for clarity and depth. Next, I established prima facie and content validity by mapping each interview question to its corresponding research question. This ensured that the protocol collected the data necessary to answer the research questions and avoid unnecessary or misaligned questions. Additionally, an expert review process is included as contingency step. It helps if peer reviewers had conflicting feedback, or if consensus had not been reached, or if there is this misalignment with the interview questions as they relate to the research questions. The dissertation committee will serve as the expert panel to determine the final protocol structure. This layered validation process will strengthen the rigor and credibility of the data collection instrument. Reliability. So, in terms of reliability, I designed the interview protocol to be implemented consistently across all participants. To ensure procedural reliability, each interview will follow the same semi structured guide with identical introductions, instructions, and sequencing of questions. I will also incorporate reflexive journaling to track my own assumptions and reactions throughout data collection, which will help minimize bias and maintain consistency in questioning and follow up probes. During analysis, reliability will be strengthened through stable coding practices. Codes will be developed iteratively and checked consistently over time. Additionally, an iterator review process will be applied to sample transcripts to ensure that the coding scheme is interpreted similarly by another trained reviewer. This layered approach will help to strengthen the reliability by ensuring that the procedures, coding decisions, and interpretive steps remain consistent across participants and the analytic process. The data analysis. So, for the data analysis, I will use Cresswell and Questwell's 5 step qualitative analytic process. First, I will prepare and organize the data, including transcription and de identification. Next, I will read and review the transcripts holistically to gain an overall sense of the participants' experiences. I will then conduct line by line coding, grouping significant statements and meaning units related to emotional labor, crisis leadership, organizational support, and experiences of the glass cliff. These initial codes will be refined and organized into broader categories. Using thematic analysis as outlined by Braun and Clark, I will identify recurring patterns and constructed themes to capture the essence of the participants' lived experiences. Throughout the process, I will use analytic memos and reflexive notes to document interpretive decisions and deepen insights. This systematic approach will help to ensure rigor, transparency, and alignment with the phenomenological methodology. So, bracketing. In the phenomenological research, bracketing or épluché, it is essential to maintaining analytic integrity. As a Black woman with lived experiences in crisis driven leadership contexts, it will be crucial for me to recognize and set aside my own assumptions, emotions, and interpretations during both the data collection and analysis process. To support this process, I will use reflective journaling throughout the study to document my reactions, reflections, and potential biases. I will also write memos during and after interviews to distinguish what participants shared from my personal interpretations. By intentionally separating my own experiences from the participants' narratives, bracketing will enable me to more accurately capture the meaning making process while reducing the influence of researcher bias. This process will strengthen my credibility and ensure that the findings will reflect the participants' lived experiences rather than my own. Inter-rater reliability. To ensure analytic rigor and consistency in my coding, I will implement a structured 5 step inter-rater reliability process. First, I will code the initial 3 interviews and develop preliminary baseline themes. Second, 2 doctoral level peers with experience in qualitative data analysis will independently review my coding and themes. We will meet to discuss alignment and refine the codebook until we reach consensus. Third, I will apply the refined coding framework to the remaining interviews and generate a second set of baseline themes across the full data set. Fourth, the same reviewers will conduct a second inter-rater review to confirm consistency and saturation in the final coding structure. Fifth, if at any point consensus is not reached, I will consult my dissertation committee, who will serve as the expert review panel to resolve discrepancies. This multi layer approach strengthens credibility, reliability, and ensures that the final themes are grounded in a consistent and transparent analytic process. The proposed improvements and modifications. First, I will continue to ensure that all APA citations throughout the chapters remain accurate and complete and fully aligned with the literature. I also plan to further refine the alignment between my research questions and interview protocol to make sure every interview question directly contributes to answering the core aims of the study. And in addition, I will incorporate any and all feedback and recommendations provided by the committee following this preliminary defense. I will work to finalize all IRB requirements so that I am in full compliance with the standards and process. And lastly, I will intend to refine the data analysis procedures ahead of coding to strengthen the coding framework, bracketing strategy, and inter-rater reliability process. Thank you all so much for taking the time to review my preliminary defense, and I welcome your feedback.